Okay, let's go. Number 1. Pluto's Gate. The year is 2013. You're Francesco D'Andrea, an archaeologist from the University of Salento in Italy, leading an excavation team at Hierapolis, an ancient Greco-Roman spa city in southwestern Turkey, built above natural hot springs that have been depositing white calcium carbonate terraces down the hillside for millennia. The terraces are still there, still forming. They are now the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Pamukkale. Tourists photograph them every day from every angle. They are not what you're looking for. What you're looking for is a cave. Ancient writers described it repeatedly. Strabo in the 1st century BC. Cicero in 54 BC. Pliny the Elder in 77 AD. They all describe a small cave at Hierapolis, sacred to Pluto, god of the underworld, where animals brought to the threshold died instantly, while the priests who served the sanctuary walked in and out without apparent harm. Strabo wrote that sparrows released near the opening fell dead before they reached the floor. Cicero described bulls collapsing within seconds of being led to the entrance. The priests called it the Plutonian Pluto's dwelling. The Romans called it Pluto's Gate. Hierapolis was abandoned during the Byzantine period, and the precise location of the gate gradually became uncertain over the centuries. You are going to find it. D'Andrea's team locates it in March 2013, during systematic excavation of the temple precincts above the hot spring terraces. The cave entrance was never deliberately hidden. It was simply buried, as the city above it was abandoned, and the hillside accumulated debris over 1,500 years. When the team clears the stone archway from the earth, they install atmospheric monitoring equipment before anyone steps through. The first readings confirm CO2 concentration at ground level, inside the cave, between 4 and 53% in the outer section. In the inner grotto, the concentration reaches 91%. The gate is still open. Whatever killed the bulls is still there. Normal atmospheric CO2 is 0.04%. At 4%, humans experience accelerated breathing and dizziness within minutes. At 8%, unconsciousness follows. At concentrations above 15%, death is rapid. The CO2 inside Pluto's Gate measures between 100 and 1,300 times the concentration required to produce incapacitation, rising to more than 2,000 times normal atmospheric levels in the inner chamber. It is not a remnant or a historical trace. The volcanic fissures in the bedrock below Hierapolis are still feeding it continuously. The team erects a fence at the entrance. In the years since the excavation, researchers monitoring the site have filmed birds flying into the threshold area and falling dead on the stone, the same thing Strabo described in the 1st century BC, still happening in the 21st AD. The fence is the only intervention. Here's where it gets strange. The priests of the Plutonian eunuch, priests of the goddess Cybele, appeared for centuries to be completely immune to what the cave produced. Pilgrims traveled from across the Roman world to witness the demonstration. A bull led forward, collapsing at the archway. The priest walking through the same cloud, unharmed. The sanctuary charged admission. The proof of divine power was the performance, and the performance ran on the priest's survival. For as long as the sanctuary operated, no one outside the priesthood understood why they lived when the animals died. A 2018 study published in Archaeological and Anthropological Sciences identified the mechanism. Carbon dioxide is denser than air. At the concentrations the Pluto's Gate cave produces, it does not mix evenly with the surrounding atmosphere it pools at ground level, filling the space from the floor upward like an invisible liquid. A bull's airways are roughly 3 feet off the ground. A standing adult human's airways are 5 to 6 feet off the ground. The lethal CO2 concentration that kills an animal at breathing height does not reach the same concentration at the height of a standing person's lungs, particularly a person who has controlled their breath, moved through the threshold without panicking, and stepped back before the exposure accumulates. The priests had understood this. They had worked out, through generations of careful and closely guarded empirical observation, exactly where the pooled gas ended, how long a person could stand at what height, how to pace themselves through the demonstration without drawing enough CO2 to lose consciousness. The immunity was entirely real. The divine power was meticulous operational knowledge, kept secret because the secret was the product. The cave sits inside the broader Hierapolis archaeological zone. The ruins of the Roman city around it, temples, baths, a necropolis, the travertine terraces are open to tourists. The cave itself is behind the fence D'Andrea's team installed in 2013. The inner grotto has never been fully excavated because the concentration of CO2 inside it makes sustained presence without specialized breathing equipment too dangerous for standard fieldwork. Researchers who approach the cave threshold for atmospheric measurements report the sensation of heavy legs and accelerated breathing within seconds, the first physiological effects as CO2 begins to displace oxygen. They take the readings and step back. The ancient sanctuary operated on a secret that was not mystical. The cave is not offering anything symbolic. The fissures below Hierapolis are geological, the gas is volcanic, and the physics of gas density is the same in the 21st century as it was in the first. What made Pluto's gate sacred for 500 years of Roman religious use is still there, at ground level, in the same concentration, doing the same thing to anything that breathes near the floor. The fence is modern. The gate has been open the entire time. In the Afar Triangle of northeastern Ethiopia, the landscape that produced our earliest ancestors does not need a fence. The ground itself is the warning, and it has been, at the chemistry it maintains, since long before our species had a name for what it was. Number 2. Danakil Depression. The year is November 24, 1974. You're at a survey site near the Awash River in the Afar region of northern Ethiopia, and Donald Johansson's team has been working this eroded hillside for weeks. Johansson is a paleoanthropologist with the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. The morning is already over 100 degrees. The team is about to break for lunch when Johansson looks at a slope he has already walked past 3 times and notices something in the soil that wasn't visible in the earlier light. A partial forearm bone. 6 inches below it, a femur, then pelvis, jaw, skull fragments. By the end of the day, the team has recovered 40% of a skeleton that is 3.2 million years old. They name her Lucy. She is Australopithecus afarensis, one of our direct ancestors. She is the oldest, most complete hominin skeleton found to that point, and she was found here, in the Danakil Depression, in the landscape that produced the first humans. This is where our story begins. The problem is what that landscape is now. The Danakil Depression sits in the Afar Triangle, the geological triple junction where the African, Arabian, and Somali tectonic plates are actively separating. A new ocean is forming here. In approximately 10 million years, the Horn of Africa will be an island, as the Afar Rift floods. The depression sits at roughly 380 feet below sea level in places, and holds the record for the world's hottest, continuously inhabited region. An average annual temperature of 94 degrees Fahrenheit, with summer highs recorded at 145 degrees. At midday on the Danakil Flats, the ground temperature reaches 170 degrees. The Dalol hydrothermal field, within the depression, holds the lowest natural pH ever recorded in an Earth environment, approximately -1.5. Battery acid has a pH near 0. The Dalol pools are more acidic than that. They are yellow, green, orange, and white-colored not by dye but by sulfur compounds, iron salts, and halite crystallization from the volcanic chemistry below. They are visually extraordinary. The ground temperature immediately around the pools can exceed 200 degrees. A person who slips into a Dalol pool does not survive the fall. Erta Ale volcano, within the depression, has maintained a persistent lava lake for more than a century of recorded observation, one of fewer than 5 permanent lava lakes on Earth. The Afar call it the Smoking Mountain, in oral tradition that predates their written language. The Afar have been living in and around the Danakil Depression for millennia. They mine salt from the crystallized flats of Lake Karam, cutting blocks with traditional tools and loading them onto camel caravans for transport north to highland markets that have bought Afar salt for as long as trade records in the region exist. The caravans number 200 to 300 camels. They cross terrain where the air over the acid pools carries compounds that damage the respiratory tract within minutes, where there is no shade or fresh water within miles, where the average temperature during caravan season exceeds 100 degrees. Here's where it gets strange. The Afar do this without the equipment that keeps outsiders alive in the Danakil. No oxygen, no acid protection, no satellite communication. They carry knowledge, a complete, internally consistent map of where the ground is safe, where the water is, when to move and when to stop, accumulated over the millennia. Their ancestors have never left this place. What they know about the Danakil took generations to accumulate. It is passed forward with the accuracy that comes from the fact that a wrong turn here kills you the same day. Foreign visitors have not fared as well. In 2012, 5 European tourists and their Ethiopian guide were killed near Erta Ale in an attack by Afar separatist rebels. 2 German tourists were kidnapped. Armed military escorts are now mandatory for any non-Afar visitor approaching the volcano or the hydrothermal fields. Several international tour operators have suspended Danakil tours indefinitely, not because of the rebels specifically, but because of a series of near-fatal incidents involving tourists overwhelmed by heat, gas exposure, and a landscape that forgives no mistakes. The Ethiopian government issues permits for Danakil tourism. Mandatory military escort, mandatory guide ratio, mandatory communication equipment, explicit liability waivers. The tourists who go anyway describe complete sensory wrongness. The ground is wrong, the color is wrong, the smell is wrong, the heat is wrong. Every physiological signal says leave. The Afar salt miners pass through without breaking stride. The most inhospitable landscape on Earth is also the one where our species began. The descendants of the people who never left it are the only ones who can navigate it without dying. What we surrendered when we migrated out was not just a place. It was 3 million years of learning how to stay. On an island in the Bay of Bengal, a group that has never needed geological hazard to enforce its boundary has been defending the same shore for 60,000 years, with arrows, with silence, and with an unbroken record that no outside civilization has ever penetrated. Number 3. North Sentinel Island. The year is 1974. You're on a boat half a mile off the coast of a small island in the Bay of Bengal, watching anthropologist T.N. Pandit prepare the approach. Pandit is with the Anthropological Survey of India. He has organized this expedition carefully. Years of preparation, gifts arranged on deck, coconuts, metal tools, a live pig, plastic buckets, cloth. The Indian authorities on the accompanying vessel have agreed to a slow, non-threatening approach. The goal is first contact with a group who have been observed from a distance for decades, who have never responded to approach with anything but hostility, and who the anthropological community believes may be one of the last genuinely uncontacted societies on Earth. The Sentinelese emerge from the tree line, painted and armed with bows and long spears. What follows is not contact in any communicable sense. Arrows are released. One strikes a film director accompanying the expedition. The boats retreat. The pig left on shore is found later, speared and buried. The Sentinelese have been on North Sentinel Island for an estimated 50,000 to 60,000 years. This is not a figure from myth. It is the estimate produced by genetic analysis of the Andamanese peoples, combined with archaeological data on human migration routes out of Africa and along the Indian Ocean rim. The ancestors of the Sentinelese were among the first modern humans to leave the African continent. They took a coastal route east. When sea levels rose and the Andaman Islands became isolated, the group on North Sentinel stopped moving. They have been there, in effective isolation from every subsequent development in human civilization, ever since. Every empire, every religion, every technological shift of the last 50,000 years happened somewhere else. In 2006, 2 Indian fishermen named Sundar Raj and Pandit Tiwari anchored their boat too close to the island while sleeping and drifted into the shallows overnight. The Sentinelese killed them. The Indian Coast Guard sent a helicopter to attempt recovery of the bodies. Arrows were released at the helicopter. It retreated. The bodies were never recovered. In November 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Chow paid local fishermen to bring him near the island. He had been planning the approach for years. He approached 3 times over 2 days. On the 3rd approach, the Sentinelese killed him. The fishermen watched from offshore. His body was seen on the beach. It was never recovered. The Indian government declined to attempt retrieval, citing legal protection for the Sentinelese and the certainty of casualties in any recovery operation. Here's where it gets strange. The Indian government's exclusion zone extends 3 nautical miles from the island's shore. Approaching within that distance is a criminal offense under the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Regulation of 1956. The government enforces this not merely as protection for outsiders, but as recognition that the Sentinelese have the right to enforce their own border and that they will, lethally, every time. Long-lens aerial photographs show something that the framing of uncontacted tribe routinely omits. The Sentinelese have cleared agricultural land. They maintain fishing canoes. Their structures are organized and substantial. The photographs do not show people struggling to survive in an environment they don't understand. They show people living as they have been living for 60,000 years in an environment they understand completely, and that outsiders understand not at all. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami struck the Andaman Islands with devastating force. When aerial survey teams flew over North Sentinel Island in the days following, expecting casualties, they found the Sentinelese moving normally. The island showed wave damage at the edges. The community was intact. The tribe had not been at sea when the wave arrived. Later analysis concluded they had moved to higher ground before impact. The tsunami traveled across the open ocean at hundreds of miles per hour with no visible surface warning. There was no modern early warning system that had alerted the coastal communities on the Andaman mainland who were killed. The most plausible explanation is generational knowledge, behavioral protocols for reading the early signals that land and sea produce before a wave of that type arrives, encoded in oral tradition across enough generations that the response is automatic and acted on without deliberation. Knowledge that 50,000 years of continuous habitation on a tectonically active island produces. The Indian government estimates that approximately 10,000 Andaman Islanders died in 2004. The Sentinelese population, which numbers somewhere between 50 and 500 individuals, appears to have suffered 0 casualties. The exclusion zone is maintained. The island is watched from a distance. The Sentinelese have continued to make their position clear on every approach. No government, no military, no religious institution, no research body has compelled access. The oldest continuous culture in human history is also one of the most effectively defended places on Earth. Defended without modern weapons, without a legal framework, without a navy. They simply kill anyone who arrives. After 60,000 years, it is working. What did they preserve in those 60,000 years of uninterrupted habitation that no other culture has kept intact? What does a people know about geology, about weather, about the behavior of the sea before it kills when they have never left the place where that knowledge was first accumulated? On a highland plateau in northeastern Laos, a civilization that vanished left 2,500 years' worth of sealed stone containers in soil that still holds the unexploded remnants of a war. The containers are Iron Age, the ordnance is not. Both are keeping people out. Number 4. The Plain of Jars. The year is 1935. You're Madeleine Colani, a French paleontologist and archaeologist attached to the École Française d'Extrême Orient, and you have spent 3 months following reports from Highland guides about a plateau in northeastern Laos where enormous stone containers are scattered across an open landscape. The guides call them the Jars of the Giants. When you crest the last ridge above the plateau outside Phonsavan in Jiangquang province, what you see is this. Hundreds of stone vessels, ranging from waist height to more than 9 feet tall, distributed across open grassland for miles in every direction. Some are sealed. Some are open to the sky. The largest weigh more than 14 tons. Each was cut from a single block of stone, sandstone, granite, limestone, and the nearest quarry where that stone occurs is between 6 and 12 miles away through highland terrain. You begin counting sites. There are more than you can document before the rainy season forces you back down. When you publish your survey in 1935, you estimate there are at least 90 distinct jar sites across the plateau. The actual number, when later teams systematically map the region, exceeds 100. The total number of individual jars runs into the thousands. No one, in 1935, can tell you who built them, why, or where the people who built them went. No one can answer that now either. The Plain of Jars is Iron Age, dated to approximately 500 BC through 500 AD, between 1,500 and 2,500 years old, depending on the site. The culture that produced the jars has no confirmed successor in the archaeological record. They left no writing, no identifiable oral tradition, no continuous population that claimed descent from them. What they left is the jars. Colani's original interpretation that the jars were used for secondary burial, bodies decomposing inside before cremated remains were sealed within, was partially confirmed by later excavations that found cremated human remains, stone grave markers, glass beads, ceramic fragments, and iron tools in and around certain jars, partially confirmed. Some jars contain nothing identifiable as a burial context. Some sealed jars have not been opened. Whether the jars are funeral urns, ritual vessels, storage containers, or something else remains unresolved. Colani's answer funerary is still the leading hypothesis, not the confirmed one. Of the more than 100 jar sites identified across Xiangkhouang province, exactly 3 are currently accessible to any visitor. Sites 1, 2, and 3. The remaining 97 plus are off-limits. The reason is not bureaucratic preservation policy. The reason is that the United States Air Force flew 580,000 bombing missions over Laos between 1964 and 1973, dropping approximately 2 million tons of ordnance during a covert air campaign that Congress was not officially informed of until it was already over. The total tonnage dropped on Laos in those 9 years exceeds the total dropped on Europe by all parties during all of World War II. Laos is the most heavily bombed country per capita in recorded history. Approximately 30% of the ordnance dropped did not detonate. That figure represents roughly 80 million unexploded cluster submunitions bomblets, the size of tennis balls, scattered across the plateau and through the soil layers of the Xiangkhouang highlands, including across most of the jar sites. UXO clearance teams from the Mines Advisory Group and the Laotian government's UXO Lao program have been working to clear the plateau since the early 1990s. In 2019, UNESCO designated the Plain of Jars a World Heritage Site. The designation citation notes explicitly that the presence of unexploded ordnance prevents comprehensive archaeological research. UNESCO has declared a World Heritage Site. It cannot fully enter. Here's where it gets strange. At the 3 accessible sites, visitors walk narrow established paths bordered by red and white marker stakes. The stakes mark the boundary of cleared ground. On the far side of the stakes, the soil has not been cleared. The jars beyond the markers are the ones the world has not seen. At sites 1, 2, and 3, researchers have been able to approach the jars, document them, and in some cases excavate carefully around them. At the sealed sites, the sites identified by aerial survey but not yet cleared, what is inside the sealed jars is unknown. In 2016, a survey team from the Australian National University used ground-penetrating radar and metal detectors to approach a previously unmapped jar cluster near Fonsavan, catalogued as Site 52. The electromagnetic density of unexploded ordnance in the surrounding soil was high enough that the team determined the site could not be safely approached or worked. The survey was suspended. It has not resumed. The jars at Site 52 remain sealed. They have not been touched since the Iron Age people who placed them there ceased to exist. What is inside them is unknown. Whether that will ever change depends on clearance timelines that currently extend decades into the future. The people who moved 14-ton stone vessels across 12 miles of highland terrain, sealed them, and left them on a plateau. In northeastern Laos, left no account of what they were doing, or who would eventually come to find them. The only thing they left is the jars. Some of those jars are sealed. The soil around the sealed ones contains the unexploded remnants of a war that ended more than 50 years ago. The jars and the ordnance have been in the ground together longer now than the bombing campaign itself lasted. In the rainforest of eastern Honduras, a lost city sealed for 500 years by jungle and legend turned out to have its own method of enforcement, one that followed the first research team back out through the canopy, in the bodies of the people who found it. Number 5. Ciudad Blanca. The year is 2012. Your Thomas Worthington, a documentary filmmaker contracted to accompany a LiDAR survey flight over an unmapped section of the Mezquitia rainforest in eastern Honduras, one of the largest remaining tracts of tropical rainforest in Central America, a region so consistently difficult to access that aerial photography and repeated ground expeditions through the 1930s, 1950s, and 1970s had all failed to resolve what, if anything, was under the canopy. The LiDAR unit fires millions of laser pulses per second downward from the aircraft. The instrument strips the forest from what it sees. It does not record trees. It records the ground beneath them, the ground that 300 feet of unbroken canopy has hidden from any human approach for 5 centuries. When the data processes, what the screen shows is not jungle. It is building foundations, plaza outlines, pyramid platforms, a settlement with the structural organization that indicates planned occupation at significant scale. A city, built, used, and then abandoned, sealed inside forest, so dense that every expedition sent to find it on foot had failed before reaching the interior. The oral tradition of the indigenous Pec people of eastern Honduras describes a great city in the deep Musquisha, abandoned by its builders, lost to the rainforest. Spanish records extend this back further. Hernán Cortés mentioned the settlement in a dispatch in 1526, calling it a place said to hold more wealth than Tenochtitlan. Subsequent conquistadors searched for it. They failed. By the end of the 16th century, the forest had absorbed whatever remained, and the Spanish called it La Ciudad Blanca, the White City, or the City of the Monkey God, and stopped looking. What the LiDAR survey found in 2012 has not been formally confirmed as the same city the Spanish described. It has not been ruled out. In 2015, the ground expedition arrives. You're Chris Fisher, an archaeologist from Colorado State University, cutting into the Musquisha with a team that includes a journalist named Doug Preston, conservation biologists, Honduran military security, and a film crew. A helicopter deposits the group in a clearing carved from the canopy. Within an hour of landing, a team member spots something at the edge of a stream bed, a carved stone, partially buried, unmistakably worked. It is a jaguar effigy. Pulling back the leaf litter reveals more. Ceramic vessels, stone animal figures, ceremonial objects, carved fragments. Archaeologists count at least 52 sculptural objects in a concentrated cache. Everything is intact. Nothing has been touched since the people who placed these objects here abandoned the city approximately 600 years ago. Fisher's team photographs, documents, and records. Ground-penetrating radar surveys confirm deposit layers below the surface. Then they leave the cache exactly as they found it. No objects are removed. The site has not been mapped. There is no excavation permit, and disturbing the deposit without full survey would be indefensible, regardless of what the instruments show. They are there to confirm what the LiDAR flight revealed. They confirm it. Here's where it gets strange. Within weeks of returning from the Musquisha, multiple members of the ground team are diagnosed with the same disease, cutaneous leishmaniasis. Chris Fisher receives a diagnosis. Doug Preston receives a diagnosis. Other team members receive diagnoses. The disease is caused by a protozoan parasite, leishmania, transmitted by sandfly bites in tropical forest environments. The initial symptoms, small bumps, at bite sites are easy to dismiss. They are not bites. Over weeks, the nodules expand into open ulcers that deepen and spread and do not resolve. Without treatment, they continue. Standard treatment is sodium stibogluconate, an antimony compound delivered by intravenous infusion over a 28-day course. The documented side effects include nausea, muscle pain, and cardiac arrhythmia, serious enough that treatment requires continuous cardiac monitoring. Preston described the 28-day course as more frightening than the disease itself. The parasite is suppressed, not eliminated. Re-exposure means starting again. The research team concluded that Ciudad Blanca's isolation had allowed the Musquisha ecology to develop a sandfly population and parasite load that cleared, inhabited land does not sustain. 500 years without human activity allowed both the forest and what lives in it to develop to a baseline that any arriving team would encounter before they had identified what they were walking into. The jungle had not simply grown over the city. It had become, in its undisturbed state, biologically hostile to the people who would come to find it. The Honduran government has classified the site as a protected cultural resource. No excavation permit exists. The jaguar cache is where it was placed when the city was abandoned. The forest closes back around the clearing between visits. In Egypt's Valley of the Kings, a different civilization left a different kind of sealed record, not sculptures in a jungle clearing, but the largest tomb complex ever found anywhere in Egypt, its interior preserved by a flood that covered 3,000 years' worth of history in limestone slurry hard enough to require hand tools and decades to move. Number 6. KV5, the Valley of the Kings. The year is 1987. You're Kent Weeks, an American Egyptologist directing the Theban Mapping Project, a systematic effort to document every known structure in the Valley of the Kings before the Egyptian Highway Authority finishes constructing a road that will pass directly over several of them. You're here to conduct salvage documentation. You survey a tomb catalogued as KV5, the fifth tomb, to receive a formal number in the valley's registry. The British archaeologist James Burton mapped it in 1825. 2 interior chambers, debris-filled, of minimal interest. You measure the entrance yourself in 1987, concur with Burton's assessment, and note it in the project records. Minor. Proceed. In 1995, your team returns to KV5 to record what Burton found before the road buries it. To access what he mapped, you have to clear debris from the entrance corridor. The corridor does not end where Burton's 2 chambers end. It branches. The branches branch again. By the end of the 1995 field season, you have documented over 60 individual chambers. By 2000, the count is more than 90. The current confirmed count exceeds 150 rooms and corridors, more than any other tomb complex ever found anywhere in Egypt. KV5 is the tomb of the sons of Ramesses II, the pharaoh who reigned from 1279 to 1213 BC, who built Abu Simbel, who fought at Kadesh, who fathered by various counts between 48 and over 100 children. He built KV5 for many of his sons. Inscriptions and sarcophagus fragments recovered from the accessible chambers have identified several of them, including Kaimwaset, the prince who spent his reign documenting and restoring the damaged monuments of earlier pharaohs, the first person in recorded history who can be called an archaeologist. He is in there somewhere, in the sealed sections his father's engineers built, waiting in the same debris that hid the complex from Burton. The Valley of the Kings receives flash floods periodically. The limestone wadi channels rainfall from the surrounding plateau with enough force to fill a tomb corridor in minutes. Documentary evidence from the ancient Egyptian period records flooding events affecting multiple valley tombs. At some point after KV5's closure around 1213 BC, a flood filled most of the complex's chambers to a depth of several feet with limestone slurry and silt, a mixture that hardened over the subsequent 3,000 years into something close to concrete. To excavate an accessible chamber, Weeks's team chips away at the consolidated matrix by hand with small tools, working in spaces where the ceiling is sometimes inches overhead and the hardened flood debris rises to meet it. Each cleared chamber is one room of the 150 plus that remain. The debris itself is what makes KV5 unlike any other Egyptian tomb. Most chambers in the Valley of the Kings were cleared by ancient tomb robbers or by early excavators. What was in them is now gone or in museums. In KV5, the flood that concealed the tomb also preserved it. What is in the hardened slurry at the base of each chamber has not been sorted, catalogued, or disturbed by anyone in 3,000 years. Each cubic foot of consolidated matrix contains not only the original chamber contents, but a record of what the floodwater carried when it came, an archive of a specific event in the Valley of the Kings, along with whatever was on the chamber floors when it arrived. Nobody knows what that is until the tool reaches it. Here's where it gets strange. Atmospheric monitoring in portions of the complex that are accessible but long sealed has recorded carbon dioxide levels significantly elevated above the 0.04% in open air, a consequence of 3 millennia of biological and chemical processes in unventilated limestone chambers. The conditions shift when disturbed. The team's monitoring equipment has detected pockets where CO2 reaches concentrations that would produce incapacitation with extended exposure. The distribution of these pockets across the complex does not correspond uniformly to the areas of heaviest flood debris or the smallest spaces. The pattern does not have a complete explanation. No complete map of KV5 exists. The Theban Mapping Project has published what has been excavated corridor systems, confirmed chamber locations, architectural drawings of the cleared sections. The unexcavated portions appear on working documents as blank space beyond the last measured point. In 2006, Weeks estimated that full excavation of the complex at current funding and access levels would require approximately 50 years to complete. The Egyptian authorities limit the team's field seasons and the number of personnel on site. The public has never been inside. What James Burton dismissed in 1825, two chambers, uninspiring, debris-filled, was the entrance corridor to the largest tomb complex ever found in Egypt, sealed by a flood and waiting 3,000 years for someone to clear enough debris to see past the first two rooms. The sons of Ramesses II are somewhere in the unexcavated sections, past the hardened slurry floors, past the CO2 pockets, past the blank spaces on the working maps. Nobody knows yet how many of them are accounted for. At 16,470 feet in the Himalayan highlands, a glacial lake smaller than a swimming pool holds a different kind of sealed archive, not limestone chambers and CO2 pockets, but hundreds of human skeletons deposited in a single afternoon, preserved for 1,000 years by altitude and cold, still waiting for someone to explain who they were. Number 7. Skeleton Lake. The year is 1942. Your H.K. Madhwal, a British forest ranger moving through the Chamoli district of the Himalayan highlands in what is now Uttarakhand. You're above the tree line, at 16,470 feet elevation. The summer has been unusually warm, and the melt has exposed more of the basin floor of Rupkund Lake than you've seen before. The lake is small, 130 feet across, about the size of a large swimming pool, and shallow enough at the edges that you can see straight to the bottom through the crystal clear water. You look into the water. The bottom is covered in human skeletons, hundreds of them. Some have preserved skin and hair still attached, kept by the freeze-thaw cycle at altitude. Some are articulated, still assembled in roughly anatomical order. You are looking at what appears to be a mass death site at 16,470 feet, in a lake with no road access, no nearby settlement, and no obvious reason for hundreds of people to have arrived here and died. Madhwal reports the discovery to British colonial authorities, who assume wartime Japanese soldiers, Indian troops, a military disaster. Medical examiners brought to the site find this incompatible with the evidence. The artifacts recovered with the skeletons, wooden objects, leather slippers, iron spearheads, bamboo staffs, silver rings, are consistent with a medieval period. These are not soldiers. These are men, women, and children. Their deaths appear to be from a single event, at a single time. What happened to them becomes partially clear only in 2004, when an expedition conducts detailed forensic analysis. The skulls show a consistent pattern of trauma, blunt force damage concentrated on the top and back of each head. The damage distribution is uniform across the sample. It is not consistent with weapons. No sword or spear produces that pattern. It is not consistent with a fall or avalanche. It is consistent with something spherical, moving from above, striking the skull at high velocity. The researchers conclude the most probable cause of death was a sudden, catastrophic hailstorm at altitude, hailstones large enough to be lethal to people who had no cover on an exposed Himalayan pass. Here's where it gets strange. There is a Himalayan folk song associated with the pilgrimage route through this region, dedicated to the mountain goddess Nanda Devi. The song describes a group of pilgrims who desecrated Nanda Devi's sacred ground, brought forbidden food, behaved with arrogance on the mountain and the goddess, angered, sent iron balls from the sky to strike them down, round objects falling from above. People killed on a mountain lake. The specific killing mechanism in the song, spherical projectiles from overhead, matches the forensic evidence with a precision that no account written after the forensic findings could have anticipated. Because the song substantially predates the forensic analysis, the song was written as a religious warning, a boundary marker in oral tradition that told pilgrims this route demanded proper conduct. But in the transmission of that warning across centuries, the accurate description of the cause of death was preserved inside the frame of the myth. The round objects were real. The dead were real. Nanda Devi's iron balls are the documented hailstones. The song is the forensic report. In 2019, a study published in Nature Communications by Harney and colleagues conducted DNA analysis on 38 individuals from Rupkund. The results divided the dead into 3 distinct genetic groups. The first was genetically consistent with South Asian ancestry pilgrims from the Indian subcontinent, consistent with the pilgrimage route. The second was genetically consistent with Southeast Asian ancestry. The third was genetically closest to populations in Crete, Greece, and the Eastern Mediterranean. This third finding has no accepted explanation. The Eastern Mediterranean individuals at Rupkund are dated to approximately the same period as the South Asian group around the 9th or 10th century AD. There is no documented trade route, military expedition, diplomatic mission, or pilgrimage tradition connecting the eastern Mediterranean to this specific high-altitude lake in the Himalayan interior in that period. The distance between Crete and Rupkund is approximately 4,000 miles overland. These people made that journey, or a significant portion of it, and they died here with Indian pilgrims, on a mountain pass, in a hailstorm, at 16,470 feet. Access to Rupkund has grown more restricted. The trek has become a popular adventure tourism destination, and the cumulative impact on the remains preserved for over a millennium by permafrost and altitude has accelerated significantly with increased foot traffic. The permafrost itself is melting as temperatures at altitude rise. The bones that survived 1,000 Himalayan winters are not surviving the warming that is arriving now. By 2100, the estimates are that Rupkund may have no skeletons left. The physical evidence will be gone. The song will outlast the skeletons. Who the Mediterranean individuals were, how they came to be on that mountain, who sent them, what they believed they were traveling toward may never be answered once the last bone dissolves in the melt. Below the streets of Paola, Malta, a structure carved from limestone 5,000 years ago holds the remains of 7,000 people, and what is happening to its painted walls bears a similar trajectory to what happened to the bones on the mountain. Not a single catastrophic event, but a slow, cumulative loss that began the moment people arrived to look. Number 8. The Hal Saflieni hypogeum. The year is 1902. You're a construction worker in Paola, a town in the center of the island of Malta, cutting the foundation for a row of new houses. The rock beneath Paola is Maltese coralline limestone, soft, consistent, the same material used in every building on the island for the past 7,000 years. Your pick breaks through a section that offers no resistance. The floor of your foundation trench has opened onto a chamber below. You lower a lamp through the gap. What you see, walls with carved spiral decorations, traces of red ochre pigment on the stone, and below this chamber another level, and below that another. You have broken through the ceiling of a structure carved from the bedrock between approximately 3,600 and 2,500 BC, 5,000 years ago, give or take a century. This is the Hal Saflieni hypogeum, the oldest underground structure of its kind, remaining in its original condition anywhere in the world. The site was first excavated between 1903 and 1907 by the Maltese Franciscan priest Emmanuel Magri, who died before completing his work. The excavation was continued by Themistocles Zammit, the Maltese archaeologist who also excavated the contemporary above-ground temples at Tarxian and Gantija. Over 8 years of work, the excavation recovered the remains of approximately 7,000 individuals, men, women, and children interred across 3 underground levels over roughly 1,000 years of continuous use. Ceramic vessels, carved figurines, amulets, and stone tools accompanied the remains. Among the figurines recovered was a small terracotta figure of a sleeping or reclining woman, the Sleeping Lady, found on the floor of a lower chamber and now held in Malta's National Museum of Archaeology. It is considered one of the finest examples of prehistoric art ever recovered in the Mediterranean. The architecture of the hypogeum is not accidental. The builders, working with obsidian tools and antler picks in the limestone, carved the underground chambers to replicate the proportions and structural elements of the above-ground megalithic temples built simultaneously on the island's surface corbelled ceilings. Trilithon doorways, the same proportional relationships between spaces, executed in negative rather than positive space. The first level functions as an outer antechamber. The second level is the most elaborate, containing a chamber known as the Holy of Holies, where ochre pigment applied to the ceiling 5,000 years ago survives, and the oracle chamber. In the oracle chamber, a rectangular niche cut into the wall approximately 20 inches wide and 30 inches deep creates a specific acoustic effect when a male voice is directed into it at low pitch. Bass frequencies fill the entire second level of the hypogeum, amplifying and distributing through the carved rock in all directions simultaneously. The effect has been measured with acoustic spectrometry and assessed as consistent with deliberate engineering. The niche, precise dimensions, and position produce the resonance. The people who carved the oracle chamber 5,000 years ago built a functional acoustic amplification system into limestone, without instrumentation, without acoustical theory, as the modern period understands it. Here's where it gets strange. In the 1980s, Maltese heritage officials noticed that the ochre pigment in the Holy of Holies was fading at a measurably accelerating rate. Condition surveys commissioned by UNESCO found elevated CO2 concentrations correlating with visitor numbers, human respiration in an enclosed space, and rising humidity from breath condensing on stone surfaces. Salt crystallization appeared on the painted areas. Moisture interacting with the limestone precipitates salt crystals within the pores of the pigment layer, disrupting it from inside. By the early 1990s, the degradation had been quantified and attributed clearly. The paintings that 4,500 years of sealed, stable conditions had preserved were being unmade by visitors looking at them. UNESCO recommended a maximum of 80 visitors per day, mandatory guided entry, timed sessions, no extended stays, and continuous atmospheric monitoring. The limit was implemented. The degradation slowed. It did not stop. The ochre paintings survived sealed and unvisited from approximately 2500 BC to 1902 AD, 4,400 years. Under the 80 per day restriction, they have continued to lose color. The rate is slow. The direction is not reversible. The paintings that survived the Bronze Age, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Arabs, the Normans, the Knights of Malta, Napoleon, and 2 world wars, did not survive being discovered. The third level of the hypogeum is not accessible to visitors or routine researchers. It lies below the second level, partially flooded in sections, with documented structural instability where the limestone has fractured along bedrock fault lines. Atmospheric monitoring of the third level has recorded CO2 concentrations above safe thresholds for extended human activity. Entry requires specialized equipment and occurs only for specific conservation assessments, infrequently, with strict time limits. Tickets to the hypogeum sell out months in advance, 80 people a day. The structure is 5,000 years old and 40 feet underground in a country of 500,000 people, and the limiting factor on how many can see it is not space or cost or bureaucracy. It is the chemistry of breath. In the Périgord Noir of southwestern France, a cave sealed for 17,000 years by a geological accident held something that preserved art better than any deliberate program ever has. The people who opened it in 1940 had 15 years before the damage became permanent. Number 9. Lascaux Cave. The year is September 12, 1940. You're Marcel Ravadat, 18 years old, in the Périgord Noir region of the Dordogne. Your dog Robot has fallen into a sinkhole on a hillside near Montignac, and you've gone in after him with 3 other boys, a long rope, and an oil lamp. The hole opens into a shaft. You descend. At the bottom, you raise the lamp, and the walls move. Horses in full gallop, bulls charging with their heads down, deer with enormous antlers, ibex. 600 individual images covering every wall of an interconnected cave system, executed in black manganese and red and yellow ochre, 17,000 years ago, by hands that understood exactly what they were doing. The cave was sealed approximately 17,000 years ago when a rockfall collapsed the entrance. In the 17 millennia between that rockfall and the afternoon Marcel's dog fell through a hole, the cave's atmosphere had been perfectly stable. Temperature, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round, unchanged. Humidity, 98%, constant. CO2, maintained by the geological chemistry of the surrounding limestone in a balance that had kept the pigment, the calcite on the walls, the airspace itself, in precisely the condition the painters had left it. Nothing had changed. Nothing had entered. Nothing had disturbed the chemistry. André Malraux, France's Minister of Cultural Affairs, opened the cave to the public in 1948. In the first year, 1,200 visitors per day entered Lascaux. By 1955, the first sign of change appeared, a film of green algae on the walls. The algae had been introduced by the altered CO2 balance. 1,200 people breathing per day produces substantially more carbon dioxide than the geological equilibrium had maintained for 17,000 years. The algae found the new conditions favorable. Malraux closed Lascaux permanently in 1963. The paintings had survived the Ice Age. They survived the warming that followed. They survived every geological event of the Dordogne for 17 centuries. They did not survive being looked at. 15 years of visitors broke what 17,000 years had preserved. Since 1963, only 5 scientists at a time are permitted inside. The cave now operates under an airlock system, decontamination protocols, strict time limits, and continuous atmospheric monitoring. Entry is not a research trip. It is closer to a medical procedure, with the cave as the patient. Here's where it gets strange. The closure did not stop what it was meant to stop. It slowed it. The organisms that human visitors had introduced had established themselves in the cave's ecosystem by the time access was restricted, and they continued to develop after the doors were sealed. The white disease appeared in the 1990s, calcium carbonate deposits forming over the paintings as altered water chemistry precipitated calcite directly onto the pigment. Thin, but progressive. Irreversible. In 2001, caretakers applied a fungicide to combat Fusarium solani, a black mold spreading across sections of the painted surfaces. The treatment changed the cave's chemistry in ways that weren't fully anticipated. Within years, a second organism appeared, a black crust, more aggressive than the mold it replaced. This organism was new, unknown to science, before Lascaux. It was named Acroconus lascausensis, a species that exists nowhere else on Earth, that evolved inside the sealed cave in the decades after the 1963 closure, that developed specifically in response to the chemical conditions that 15 years of tourism and 40 years of subsequent intervention had created. The cave grew its own organism in response to humans. That organism is consuming the art. Some figures in Lascaux are now partially obscured by calcite deposits or biological growth. The rate of loss is not catastrophic year to year. It is slow, cumulative, and irreversible. The monitoring protocols detect it, the interventions slow it. They do not reverse it. The cave will never return to the condition it was in on September 11, 1940, the day before the boys descended. That condition is permanent past. The current access protocol allows a maximum of 5 researchers, in specialized suits, for a maximum of 45 minutes per visit, a limited number of times per year. Each person who enters Lascaux introduces, despite all precautions, some quantity of biological material from the outside world. Each visit is a calculated compromise between the scientific value of continued monitoring and the measurable damage of continued entry. The researchers who study Lascaux are also, in a small and precisely measurable sense, part of what is killing it. The cave was sealed 17,000 years ago by geological accident. It was opened in 1940. It was sealed again in 1963 by deliberate decision. The second sealing came 15 years too late. What is in Lascaux now that wasn't there in 1940 cannot be removed. What is on the walls is slowly being covered by what we introduced. The people who painted those horses and bulls in the dark sealed the cave behind them, and in that sealing, they protected the work for longer than every civilization that has existed since their time combined. We found it. We looked at it for 15 years. We may not be finished paying for that. In the sandstone cliffs of northwestern Saudi Arabia, a Nabatean city of the dead has been sealed for 1,400 years by something none of these other places had. A prohibition written into a religious text, maintained by cultural reflex across 60 generations, protecting the site more completely than any fence or exclusion zone ever managed. Number 10. Madain Saleh. The year is 630 AD. You're on a road north of Medina with the army of the Prophet Muhammad, heading toward the Byzantine frontier in the campaign of Tabuk. The route runs through the Hijaz, the northwestern Arabian peninsula, through a region of rose-colored sandstone mountains carved by the Nabatean civilization into elaborate cliff tombs before the birth of Christ. The city here was Hegra. It had been a major Nabatean commercial hub. Caravans moving between the Arabian interior and the Mediterranean passed through its gates. The Romans absorbed the Nabatean kingdom in 106 AD and renamed the city Egra. Egra, the same sandstone cliffs, the same carved facades, the same inhabited city, transferred between empires without major disruption until the trade routes shifted and the population dispersed. By 630, the site has been abandoned for several centuries. Muhammad's army passes through it. According to the Hadith, the collected reports of Muhammad's words and actions that constitute the second source of Islamic law after the Quran, the Prophet's behavior at Hegra is specific and deliberate. He accelerates through the area without stopping. He covers his face. He instructs his companions to prepare their food and water before entering the site and not to consume anything from within it. He weeps. He tells his companions that the people who built these monuments were those who had wronged themselves, the people of the prophet Saleh, described in 2 separate Quranic passages, who were sent a she-camel as a divine sign, killed it, and were subsequently destroyed. The Quran uses the site as an object lesson in divine punishment serious enough to warrant passing quickly, without lingering, averting your gaze. For the next 1400 years, Muslims did. The prohibition was not enforced by legislation or maintained by state bureaucracy. It was cultural reflex, the kind of behavioral pattern that a religious warning, sustained through enough generations, becomes automatic. Saudi citizens did not visit Madain Saleh. They did not build near it. They did not quarry its stone for construction, which is what happened to most other accessible ancient sites in the region. The Quranic prohibition did what fences and heritage protections rarely manage. It kept the site in genuine suspension for over a millennium. Here's where it gets strange. The consequence of 1400 years of Quranic prohibition was that Madain Saleh emerged into the modern period as the best preserved Nabatean site anywhere on Earth, better preserved than Petra, the more famous Nabatean city in southern Jordan, which had been continuously inhabited, excavated, photographed, mapped, and touristed since the 19th century. Madain Saleh has 131 monumental cliff tombs, their facades carved to heights of up to 72 feet directly into rose sandstone. The dedicatory inscriptions above the tomb chambers are intact. Pigment traces survive in the carved decoration. Many tomb interiors, sealed by the Nabatean engineers who cut them 2,000 years ago, never opened by the robbers or opportunists who cleared most comparable sites, have not been formally excavated. What is inside them is not known. The Nabateans cut Hegra's tombs in the 1st century BC and the early 1st century AD, at the height of the trade network that connected the Arabian Peninsula to Rome and the Mediterranean. The tombs are large, intended for family groups. They feature carved inscriptions specifying who was permitted to use each chamber and what penalties applied to unauthorized interment. The Nabateans were practical about the afterlife in the way that a trading people are practical about everything. The chambers were assets. The inscriptions were contracts. The people who built them understood that the contracts would be respected only as long as someone remained to enforce them. When the trade routes shifted and Hegra's population dispersed, the contracts lapsed. The chambers sat sealed in the sandstone. Saudi Arabia opened Madain Saleh, officially renamed Al Ula, to international tourism in 2019. In the centuries before, access had been limited to researchers with specific permission from the Saudi Commission for Tourism and National Heritage. The first organized tourist groups arrived the year the restriction lifted. Seasonal visitor caps are in place. The site is being introduced to the public under a framework designed to avoid what happened to Petra, where mass tourism over decades produced significant erosion, unauthorized access, and ecological damage despite UNESCO World Heritage status. Madain Saleh has had one form of protection removed and another installed in its place. The tomb interiors that have not been excavated remain closed. The Nabatean engineers who sealed them are the last people to have been inside. From Pluto's gate to the Danakil, from North Sentinel to the Plain of Jars, from Ciudad Blanca to KV5, from Skeleton Lake to the hypogeum, from Lascaux to Madain Saleh, these places are not sealed for the same reasons, and the dangers that enforce their restrictions are not the same kind, but the pattern underneath them is consistent. The natural world and the human world both produce places where the danger is specific enough and persistent enough and well documented enough that the decision to keep people out has been made and maintained across years and decades, and in some cases tens of thousands of years. The places themselves are not passive. They were doing what they do before we named them, and they will be doing it after the last map is drawn. Subscribe if you want to keep finding them. Leave a comment with which of these places you'd visit if you could, and tell us where you're watching from.